All right. Why people differ in trait hostility. If you've been reading the chapter on anger, you probably can recognize that this person's making an angry face. It's really hard if you Google on, Google images, angry face. They tend to give you like the enraged face, right, where the teeth are bared and like they look like they're about to bash you over the head. Um, as Ekman points out, typically with anger, you have the lowering of the brows, the thinning of the lips, right? Like what this face is displaying on my slide is much more commonly displayed in a person who's actually angry, not enraged or homicidal. So there are some genetic or physiological causes for trait hostility that have been explored. Some children are just born more irritable, more touchy, more easily angered, and you can see it from the time that they're very small infants. There's a whole body of literature on babies who develop colic, which is a baby who cries inconsolably for 3 hours at a stretch every single day. I mean, like, those are the criteria. I'm not just giving you a rough estimate. I'm telling you every day for 3 hours straight, the baby cries unconsolably. And there's nothing really that can be done to make the crying stop. It's just something that's happening. They're very irritable. Something's happening, and some people say that it's digestive, but it's not. It doesn't work for everybody to sort of deal with digestive issues. Others have argued that it might be neurological overstimulation that might be happening because the crying tends to start in the late afternoon. One way or another, it's very difficult to explain why. There are some people some babies who develop colic sometime around 3 to 4 weeks after birth, and usually it'll stick around for 2 or 3 months. And if you can imagine being the parent of a baby who cries inconsolably for hours on end every single day, it could be really hard to parent those children. And so you end up with like a breakdown of the parental attachment, oftentimes coming from colicky babies. So some babies are just born like that, and then when you follow babies who were colicky and look later in infancy at their irritability and other measures of how hard it is to soothe them or to meet their needs, it seems to persist at least through infancy. So it might be that some people are just born more irritable. We do see that people who are adults who are more easily angered tend to come from families that are more disruptive, right? Like there's been breakdown of the family, one or both of the parents are absent for some period of time, things like that. Very chaotic families. Families that are not skilled in emotional communications, which I think is probably a lot of families. I mean, let's be honest. Most of us are not the greatest natural, communicators about emotions. And so hopefully that'll be an advantage for you having taken this class someday in the future when you may or may not have children, that this could be, helpful, because having better communication with your partner, having better communication with your children might help them to be less hostile adults, possibly. But I'm being really careful because we don't really know. I mean, it's possible that we see this kind of consistency. People from chaotic families tend to then themselves be hostile, and then they tend to have their own chaotic families. It could be that all that's genetic. It has nothing to do with upbringing or anything else. It's that the person who's doing the raising has this genetic physiological predisposition to be irritable or hostile. And it's just, it would take a lot of intervention to have something else happen. Like, this is their natural predisposition. Testosterone may increase angry responses, especially in people who have gone through puberty. Testosterone is a very common explanation for the sex difference between hostility. Males tend to show more hostility than females do on average. Lots of hostile females in the world and lots of unhostile males in the world. So it's not perfect, but on average, it's more common for males to be hostile and more common for males to be physically aggressive. And so a lot of people look at testosterone as explanations for those things. It can't be purely testosterone, because even in males who have lower levels of testosterone than is needed to foster, other functions like hair growth and things like that, they will still tend to be on average more aggressive than females. And so it's maybe they still have more testosterone than the female. The other thing that makes it a little questionable that it's testosterone is if you look at males who have what's colloquially referred to as Superman syndrome, where they have one X chromosome and then they have two Y chromosomes. So they're getting sort of double the masculine messaging of, the hormone from the Y chromosome. So they get more androgens. They tend to be taller. They tend to have bigger muscle mass. They tend to be greasier, like they secrete more sebum. All the symptoms of testosterone are heightened in them. And so you would expect, well, they've got like way more testosterone, they should be way more aggressive. And it turns out that it's inverse. They are much less aggressive. Some people argue, well, they're so muscular and tall and all these things, nobody challenges them. Could be. But if we're going to argue that testosterone makes you act like this, they are definitely, an argument against that interpretation, right? So testosterone may increase angry responses or fuel anger once it starts. It might. It's not really clear. Some sociocultural factors. One thing is, in most cultures, anger is considered something negative, right? Like you only get angry if you don't have control over yourself or you're not mature or, you shouldn't let people see you get angry, right? And we oftentimes are not really taught how to handle it, like maybe to notice how it feels when you're starting to get angry rather than waiting until, I've really blown up and this has gone way more than it should have. We aren't really taught those things, and we aren't really taught good strategies for how to channel our anger effectively. And so, we might see that some people are just not as competent to figure that stuff out on their own. Our culture doesn't help us, our training doesn't help us. And so it's kind of like you have to figure it out your own from feedback from the environment, getting punished and reinforced for different behaviors. And so maybe some people just don't learn it. And so they end up more generally hostile. All right. So what can we do to cope with anger? I'll let your textbook talk about facial expressions and other kinds of things. What can we do? It also talks a little bit about how to respond to somebody who you are detecting signs of anger in. That's really good advice. I wanted to talk about coping with anger, as people who might be angry. There are conscious ways to cope with anger, like we could express how we're feeling. We could say, that made me really angry, right? Your misdeed, I would like to recommend you insert whatever the person really did, made me feel threatened, or made me feel unseen, or made me feel picked on, or whatever it actually is. Like, actually express what you're feeling. It's always productive to use that structure where you say, made me feel, made me, that way you're not talking about you did this and you always do that. And like that, you're instead saying, I really felt unheard and angry when you dismissed my ideas, something like that. You can consciously suppress your angry feelings. You can deliberately try to convert the anger into another reaction. So that you're starting to get angry. So you might say, I'm going to turn this into an opportunity to see the humor in this situation. I know it's starting to make me angry. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to imagine that person as who I feel like is acting like a dirt bag. I'm going to picture them as an actual bag of dirt with a head sticking out of it and flies on their head. And I'm just going to try and not go down the angry path. I'm going to try and make it into something that I'm still, when you're feeling mirth, that also involves your heart rate being up and things like that. So it'll take advantage of the fact that your sympathetic nervous system is already, ginned up. So you might as well take it and turn it into something that is more of a positive experience. You can deliberately try to put the anger reaction out of your mind and say, you know what, I am definitely angry that just happened, but I don't have time to deal with it right now. brood about this later if I want. And hopefully by the time you have time to really think about it, it's just not that compelling anymore. Hopefully with a little bit of, distance, you can put it into perspective and say, it really just doesn't matter that much. Never mind. I'm not gonna spend my time brooding about it. I don't feel like getting madder right now. But you can deliberately put it out of your mind, but you have to acknowledge, I'm feeling angry. I'm really irritated. I feel like, kicking something, but I'm not going to think about that anymore because this isn't the time or the place, or I don't want to be feeling like this right now. You can do conscious calming techniques where you can say, I am going to sit here and inside my head, I'm going to very slowly count to 10 before I react. I'm not going to say the first thing that comes to mind. I'm going to literally take a beat before I react, and that'll help give me a second to calm down. During that calming, you might be counting literally like 1, 2, and a deep from your belly breathe to calm down before you react. Maybe you might say, you know what? I can feel that I'm starting to get upset about this. I'm starting to feel like picked on, or I'm starting to feel like my feelings are getting hurt. And so you know what? I'm going to take a little pause in this conversation. I'm going to take a quick walk around the block to clear my mind. And then when I get back, we can continue the conversation, because I don't want to be feeling up against a wall while we're talking about this, right? So you can consciously say, I need to clear my head. This is a tough one if you're the kind of person who feels like a person who walks away from a conversation is dismissing you and really won't come back and have the conversation. It can make you want to like run after them and say, no, we have to keep talking. Don't leave me. But as the person who needs to kind of clear their head so that they don't get swept up with anger, consciously calming yourself down before resuming the conversation can make a lot of sense. You can't take that opportunity to sort of flee and never come back. Like, that's not fair if this is happening, especially in a relationship, right? With somebody who you have to see again. So if you say you're taking a brisk walk, you have to take a brisk walk, not be gone for 4 hours, and, come back and be willing to sit down and talk again. There are some unconscious things that we do, and by unconscious, it means you're not really meaning to do it. These are the kinds of things that, Freud would say is being governed by your id, but, other psychologists would say is being governed by maybe your limbic system, your fight or flight, tendencies, and not, the key thing is you're not doing it on purpose and with thought. You're just doing it sort of automatically. So you might unconsciously express yourself and just lash out verbally. You don't edit anything that you say, just whatever comes to mind, you just say it, and maybe you say some stuff you shouldn't say. Maybe you say some hurtful things. You might do some low blows. You might do some name calling when you do this kind of unconscious lashing out and just let it go uncensored, right? Sometimes unconscious expression is good because you might accidentally say what really needs to be said. Not low blows and name callings, but be honest. Sometimes if you don't censor yourself, you'll actually be honest and you'll say what you need, and you might actually make some headway. So it's not always bad to express. Your unconscious expressions are not always bad. It's just that a lot of times the bad expressions are ones that were not done on purpose. I'd like to grant us all a little bit of grace and assume that we weren't intending to be that kind of person who goes just completely low blow and name calling on purpose. Like, I'm doing this purposely to watch you squirm is not a good thing to have to admit about ourselves. So I'm going to assume we're not doing that. And that it's coming out unconsciously. We can unconsciously suppress our emotions. And so we might go with denial, right? When you decide to go with what Ekman says in the book and say, I can tell that you seem a little bit upset about what we're talking about. Would you like to talk about that a little further? Upset? Me? I'm not upset. No, I'm fine. Right? That kind of denial. That's really common. That's why he says to be kind of careful about asking a person about what you've detected from their micro expressions in particular, because they may be really trying hard to suppress what they're really feeling, not only from you, but from themselves. Like, the reason why they're suppressing it is because they might be uncomfortable with it. They don't want to admit that about themselves, that this is how they're feeling. They don't want to have to maybe embrace those feelings or deal with those feelings. And so the idea that you would say, I can see that you're angry, you can imagine that a person who's like, but I was covering it so well, and I don't wait. I was doing a pretty good job of hiding it from me. How did you see it, right? And they may honestly believe they're not actually angry. I'm not angry. Um, when they start to feel the physiological responses to anger, their heart starts pounding. Their adrenaline's flowing and stuff like that. They may say, man, I'm feeling really antsy. I need to go for a run, and not really have any clue that what they're doing is feeling angry and displacing that into, going for a run. They may honestly think, I'm just feeling really, hopped up. I need to go for a run. And so with these unconscious behaviors, it's really important to remember that the number one person who is being fooled by these unconscious things is the person who is experiencing the emotion. They honestly think that they are masking it, or that it doesn't even exist. They can do unconscious calming things like, twisting your hair. Have you ever noticed people have little tics like that when they're feeling uncomfortable for one reason or another? They might reveal that by these little tics. Both of my kids are hair twisters, and given that my son has really short hair, it's kind of cute as a full-grown adult to sometimes see him twist the hair like on the top of his head. A 6'4" dude, giant long arm, and he's like twisting the hair on the top of his head because he's like unconsciously calming himself. My daughter, she, at least has longer hair and can kind of discreetly sort of pull it down here and be twisting it. But yeah, it's kind of cute as full-grown adults to see them still doing these like unconscious throwbacks to when they were little kids kind of behaviors that made them feel comfortable when they were younger. Maybe you have a person who hasn't smoked in years, but they're really angry, really, maybe going through a really tumultuous divorce or something, and they just keep having all of these, angry interactions and stuff, and they start smoking again. And they don't know, they're like, well, it makes me feel better. And they don't really think about the reason why is that, the nicotine and the routine and all the things that they're doing is actually having, an effect on their sympathetic nervous system and then their unconscious psyche to make them feel a little bit more calm. And they're doing it unconsciously. So by and large, conscious approaches to coping with anger are going to be the healthier way to handle it. First off, recognizing that you're angry is a huge improvement over pretending like you're not. Acknowledging any of our emotions is going to be a benefit compared to denying the existence of our emotions. So that's always a really good, safe thing to say. But it's also really important to reemphasize that just because it's unconscious, just because you're doing it without thinking, does not mean always that it's a destructive thing to do. Sometimes it's just a coping mechanism that is neutral at the worst. Maybe sometimes it's a little bit positive, right? Like it might be helpful. Like twisting your hair might actually calm you down till now you can actually think more clearly, so that now you can actually think about why you're feeling this way. And then you can actually start to move over into some conscious processing, right? So sometimes it can be okay, right? Like to use these unconscious things. It's just, the more we can be consciously aware, the healthier we will be. So that sounds like a good place to stop. Let's start the next section talking about an old piece of advice that I would like you not to use. Catharsis.